The millionaire CEO thought he was about to humiliate a waitress until she spoke words that would destroy his empire. Christopher Hale strutted into Mel's all-night diner like he owned the place. Designer shoes clicked against cracked linoleum. His $1,000 suit stood out among the tired faces nursing coffee at 3 a.m. He'd just closed a deal worth 8 figures, and the adrenaline demanded an audience. Have you ever watched someone's world crumble with a single sentence? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The harsh white lights painted everything in sharp contrast. Cheap vinyl booths, coffee-stained counters, and workers pulling double shifts just to survive. Christopher's presence cut through the atmosphere like expensive cologne through cigarette smoke. Behind the counter, Danielle Carter moved with practiced efficiency. 26 years old, curves that caught attention whether she wanted it or not, and eyes that held more intelligence than her uniform suggested. She'd been working since 6 p.m., and her feet ached, but rent didn't pay itself. Christopher slid into a corner booth, phone already out, making calls loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell the board we're expanding to 3 more cities. Money talks, and I speak fluent cash. Danielle approached with coffee, professional smile, firmly in place. What can I get you tonight? His gaze traveled over her body like he was pricing merchandise. Well, what do we have here? He leaned back, enjoying the attention his voice commanded from other tables. You look smart enough. Let's play a little game. Have you ever watched someone's world crumble with a single sentence? Ever been underestimated because of where you work or how you look? This CEO was about to learn that arrogance has a price. But what he discovered next would change everything he thought he knew about power. Christopher pulled out a napkin, scribbling something across it with his gold pen. The letters looked foreign, ancient. He slid it toward her with a smirk that made her skin crawl. I'll give you my whole salary if you can translate this. His voice carried across the diner, drawing chuckles from other customers. Go ahead, sweetheart. Take a shot. Danielle picked up the napkin, her fingers steady despite the mockery in his tone. The words stared back at her, familiar symbols she'd seen countless times growing up in her grandfather's study in New Orleans. The diner fell silent as she cleared her throat. Sofia Gia Philomachias Kai Gikaiozinis. Her pronunciation was flawless, each syllable rolling off her tongue like music. Wisdom through love of learning and justice. Christopher's smirk faltered. The coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. You want the literal translation or the contextual meaning? Danielle continued, her voice gaining strength. Because in ancient Greek philosophy, this phrase specifically refers to knowledge gained through suffering, wisdom earned, not inherited. The other customers stopped eating. Even the cook stepped out from the kitchen. Christopher's face drained of color. Where did you learn? Funny. Danielle leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that made his skin crawl. You have no idea where those words came from, do you? Her proximity sent heat through his chest despite the growing dread. She smelled like vanilla and determination, nothing like the expensive perfumes he was used to. His body reacted even as his mind raced. Those aren't just random ancient Greek words, she continued. That's a family motto. From a manuscript that belonged to my grandfather, Dr. Marcus Carter, a historian from New Orleans. A manuscript that went missing 23 years ago. Christopher's hand trembled as he reached for his water glass. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Danielle straightened, but her eyes never left his face. Tell me, Mr. Hale, because yes, I know exactly who you are. When did your family's company adopt wisdom through heritage as their corporate motto? The question hit him like a physical blow. That motto sat on every Hale Industries building, every business card, every piece of company literature. It had been their brand identity for over 2 decades. 23 years ago, he whispered, the admission escaping before he could stop it. Same year my grandfather's life's work disappeared. Her voice carried pain wrapped in steel. Same year your daddy's failing construction company suddenly rebranded as a Heritage Preservation Corporation and started winning government contracts. Drop a comment if you've ever shocked someone who underestimated you. Have you experienced that moment when the tables turned completely? Share your story below. Christopher's mouth went dry. His father had told him the motto came from a business consultant, part of their company's transformation. He never questioned it, never dug deeper. Why would he? Success didn't require explanations. You're accusing my family of... I'm not accusing. Danielle's smile was razor sharp. I am stating facts. Facts I can prove. She reached in her apron pocket, pulling out her phone. Her fingers moved across the screen with purpose while Christopher sat frozen, watching his carefully constructed world tilt off its axis. My grandfather documented everything before it was stolen. Every page, every symbol, every translation note. She turned the phone toward him, and Christopher's vision blurred. The photograph showed pages of ancient text in careful handwriting, dated 24 years ago, 1 year before his family's miraculous business turnaround. At the top of the page, in Dr. Marcus Carter's precise script, family motto research, Sophia, Dia Philomathias Kai Dikaiazines. That's impossible, Christopher breathed, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Danielle pocketed her phone, studying his face like she was reading a map. Your family built an empire on stolen words, Mr. Hale. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The diner had gone completely quiet. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. Christopher's mind raced through implications. Stock prices, board meetings, media scrutiny. Everything he'd worked for hanging by a thread, held by a waitress who somehow knew his deepest family shame. But underneath the panic, something else stirred. Her intelligence excited him in ways his usual conquest never had. The way she dismantled his arrogance piece by piece showed a mind that could match his own. Dangerous territory for a man used to buying what he wanted. What do you want? The question came out rougher than intended. Danielle wiped down the table with deliberate slowness, her movements hypnotic in the harsh light. Meet me tomorrow, midnight, Oakland Cemetery, Section 15, where my grandfather rests. Come alone. She turned to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Hale, bring your checkbook. You're about to learn the real cost of wisdom. As the door chimed behind another customer, Christopher sat alone with a napkin, the ancient Greek words now looking like his own death warrant. The waitress who'd served him coffee had just served him the shock of his life. The worst part? Despite everything, he couldn't stop thinking about the way her lips had shaped those ancient words, or how her eyes had held fire and intelligence that made his expensive dates seem like cardboard cutouts. He was in trouble. Deep, dangerous, expensive trouble. And for the first time in years, Christopher Hale had no idea how to buy his way out. The richest man in Dallas spent the next 24 hours discovering that money couldn't buy him out of the truth. Christopher didn't sleep. He stood in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Dallas, watching the city lights blur through floor-to-ceiling windows while his mind raced through possibilities. The ancient Greek phrase echoed in his head like a death sentence. He'd called his lawyers at 4 a.m., then his private investigators, then his father's oldest business partner, dragging the man out of bed with questions about company history that should have been innocent. The motto, Gerald Hastings had sounded confused through the phone. Son, that came from some academic your daddy bought research from. Down in Louisiana, I think. Why are you asking about ancient history? Ancient history. The irony wasn't lost on Christopher. Now, as afternoon sunlight slanted through his office, Christopher stared at the email his investigator had sent. Dr. Marcus Carter, professor of classical studies at Tulane University, specialist in ancient Greek philosophy and African diaspora intellectual traditions, reported a theft of valuable manuscripts in 2001. Case never solved. Found dead in his home 3 months later. Heart attack, the coroner had ruled. Stress-related. Christopher's hands shook as he scrolled through the report. Danielle Carter, granddaughter. Full scholarship to Emory University. Degree in classical literature with honors. Currently working multiple jobs to support her sick mother. The same mother whose medical bills his father's company insurance had mysteriously denied coverage for, according to another document in the file. His company, his insurance subsidiary. His family's web of businesses that had somehow touched this woman's life in all the worst ways. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hale, your 3 p.m. is here. Cancel it." Christopher's voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "Cancel everything today." He couldn't focus on mergers and acquisitions when a waitress from Atlanta held the power to destroy everything his family had built. More than that, when she was right, when justice sat on her side of the table, and he was left holding stolen goods worth billions. The flight to Atlanta took 2 hours. Christopher spent them alternating between panic and an emotion he couldn't name. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the way her lips had shaped those ancient words, the fire in her dark eyes when she called out his family's lies. He'd dated models, actresses, socialites, women who wanted his money, his status, his name on their Instagram posts. None of them had ever made his pulse race the way Danielle Carter had while serving him coffee and serving him his comeuppance. Dangerous thoughts for a man whose world was imploding. Oakland Cemetery felt different at midnight. Shadows moved between headstones like secrets taking physical form. Christopher found section 15 easily enough. His shoes crunched on gravel paths that had seen decades of mourners and memories. She was already there. Danielle stood beside a modest granite headstone, wearing jeans and a sweater that hugged her curves in ways her work uniform had only hinted at. Moonlight caught the silver necklace at her throat, some kind of pendant that looked old, valuable in ways that had nothing to do with money. "You came." Her voice held surprise and something else. "Approval? Did you think I wouldn't? Men like you don't usually venture into neighborhoods like this after dark." She gestured to the modest houses surrounding the cemetery, too far from valet parking and bottle service. Christopher stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than logic. "You don't know anything about men like me, don't I?" Danielle's smile was challenging. "Rich boy from Dallas. Private schools, trust fund, daddy's company handed to you on a silver platter. The kind of man who thinks everything has a price." "You're right." The admission surprised them both. "That's exactly who I am." Or was. She studied his face in the moonlight. "What changed?" "You." The word escaped before he could stop it. "You stood in that diner and showed me that everything I thought I knew was built on lies." Have you ever had someone completely shatter your worldview in a single conversation? Ever discovered that your family's success came at someone else's expense? Tell me in the comments how you'd handle learning everything you believed was wrong. Danielle moved closer to her grandfather's headstone, her fingers tracing the carved letters. Marcus Carter, 1945 to 2001. He spent 40 years collecting and preserving African intellectual contributions to Western philosophy. His life's work filled 3 manuscripts. "And my father stole them." Your father bought them from someone who stole them. Her correction was important. The question is whether his son has enough honor to make it right. The space between them hummed with tension. Christopher found himself studying the curve of her neck, the way her hair fell across her shoulders. Wrong time, wrong place, but his body didn't care about propriety. "I brought something." He pulled out an envelope, thick with documents. Signed ownership transfer. Every patent, trademark, and copyright derived from your grandfather's work. All of it goes back to your family. Danielle's eyes widened. She hadn't expected him to move this fast. "That's not all." Christopher's voice dropped lower. "I also brought this." The second envelope was thinner. Inside, a cashier's check that made her breath catch. "That's what my company has earned using your grandfather's intellectual property over 23 years. Principal and interest." Danielle stared at the check. More money than she'd see in several lifetimes. Enough to quit every job, pay off every debt, never worry about rent or groceries or her mother's medications again. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Because it's right." Christopher stepped closer, close enough to catch her scent, something clean and honest that made his chest tight. "Because your grandfather deserved better. Because you deserve better." She looked up at him, this man who'd mocked her 12 hours ago and was now offering to bankrupt himself for justice. The moonlight caught something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse, mixed with something that looked dangerously like desire. There's one more thing. Danielle's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. I don't want your money. Christopher blinked. What? I want partnership. She stepped closer, near enough to see the confusion flickering across his features. You have resources. I have vision. Together, we could build something that honors my grandfather's memory instead of just paying for your family's crimes. The proposal hung between them like a bridge over dangerous water. You want to work with me? His voice carried disbelief and something warmer. After what my family did, I want to transform what your family built into something worthy of what they stole. Christopher stared at her, this woman who'd turned his world upside down and was now offering to help him rebuild it. The smart business move was to take the money and run. Cut ties, avoid complications. But as she stood there among the headstones, offering partnership instead of punishment, Christopher realized he didn't want the smart move. He wanted her. Partnership, he repeated slowly. Equal partnership. Her chin lifted with challenge. 50-50 ownership. Joint decision-making. My grandfather's work gets the recognition it deserved, and your company's resources serve communities that need them most. And if I say yes? Danielle smiled, and Christopher felt something shift in his chest. Then we shake hands and start building something worth building. And if I say no? Her smile turned sharp as broken glass. Then I call the New York Times, the Washington Post, and every news outlet that loves a good story about corporate fraud. Your empire becomes my grandfather's vindication. Christopher extended his hand. Partners. The moment their palms touched, electricity shot up his arm. Her skin was warm, callous from honest work, and her grip was firm as any businessman's he'd ever met. Partners, she agreed. But as their hands lingered together longer than necessary, both felt the dangerous undercurrent flowing between them. This was supposed to be about justice, about righting historical wrongs. It was becoming about something much more complicated. There's one condition, Danielle said, her voice softer now. Name it. You spend 1 week in my world before I enter yours. No drivers, no assistants, no credit cards that buy you out of inconvenience. You want to be my partner? Prove you can handle my reality. Christopher's thumb brushed across her knuckles before he could stop himself. When do we start? Tomorrow. 6 Uhr morgens. I'll pick you up at your hotel. As she walked away, her figure disappearing between the headstones, Christopher remained standing beside Dr. Marcus Carter's grave. The old man's dates stared up at him. 1945 to 2001, a life cut short by stress his family had caused. But his granddaughter was very much alive. Smart, beautiful, righteous, and completely unlike any woman Christopher had ever encountered. He was in trouble. Deep, dangerous, expensive trouble. And for the first time in years, Christopher Hale had no idea how to buy his way out. The napkin was still in his hand, the ancient Greek words now looking less like a test and more like a prophecy. Wisdom through love of learning and justice. Tomorrow, his education would begin. Drop a comment if you've ever shocked someone who underestimated you. Have you experienced that moment when the tables turned completely? Share your story below and let me know what you think Christopher's week in Danielle's world will teach him. She didn't just translate his test. She exposed a family secret worth millions that his grandfather took to his grave. 6 a.m. came like a judgment call. Christopher stood outside the Four Seasons Atlanta, designer luggage reduced to a single backpack as instructed. His usual armor of expensive suits had been replaced with jeans and a button-down that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but it was the closest thing to normal he owned. A battered Honda Civic pulled up to the curb, music thumping from speakers that had seen better days. Through the windshield, Danielle's face was unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Get in. Her voice carried through the rolled-down window. Christopher slid into the passenger seat, immediately aware of how small the space felt. Her car smelled like coffee and that vanilla scent he'd noticed last night. Fast food wrappers littered the floor, and the radio was stuck on a hip-hop station that made his teeth ache. Sleep well? Danielle asked, pulling into traffic without looking at him. No. Honesty seemed safer than pretense. I spent the night researching your grandfather. Her jaw tightened. And I found the police report, the missing manuscripts, the insurance claims that were denied. Christopher's voice grew quieter. His death certificate. Danielle's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Stress-induced heart attack. That's what they called it. Like stress was some random disease instead of what happens when your life's work gets stolen and nobody believes you. They drove through neighborhoods Christopher had never seen. Not the Atlanta of tourist brochures and business conferences, but the Atlanta where real people lived. Modest houses with careful gardens, corner stores behind metal grates, children walking to school with backpacks that had seen multiple siblings. This is where I grew up. Danielle pointed to a small house with a front porch that sagged slightly. Grandfather's study was in the back room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, manuscripts in protective sleeves, temperature-controlled storage for the really old stuff. Christopher tried to imagine a young Danielle surrounded by ancient texts, learning Greek and Latin while her classmates played video games. The image stirred something in his chest that felt dangerously close to admiration. He taught you everything. Everything he could before your family's theft killed him. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Christopher heard the pain underneath. They pulled into the parking lot of Grady Hospital. The building looked tired, overworked, exactly like the people flowing in and out of its doors. "Why are we here?" Christopher asked. "Because this is where my mother receives dialysis 3 times a week. Because this is where I learned that insurance companies find creative ways to deny coverage when it's expensive." Danielle turned off the engine and faced him. "Because this is what your family's success cost mine. Have you ever realized that your comfort came at someone else's expense? Ever discovered that your family's achievements were built on someone else's dreams?" Share in the comments how you'd face that truth. Inside the hospital, Danielle moved with familiar confidence through hallways that smelled like disinfectant and hope. Christopher followed, his presence drawing curious stares from staff who clearly knew Danielle well. "Baby girl," a nurse's voice rang out. "You're early today. Brought someone to meet Mama." Danielle's smile was genuine for the first time Christopher had seen. "This is Christopher. Christopher, meet Regina. She's been taking care of my mother for 3 years." Regina's eyes narrowed as she took in Christopher's expensive watch and perfect haircut. "Uh-huh. And what brings Mr. Money to our little corner of reality?" "He's learning," Danielle said simply. They entered a room where a woman in her 50s sat connected to a dialysis machine, her face drawn, but her eyes bright with intelligence that clearly ran in the family. "Mama, this is Christopher Hale." The name registered immediately. Elena Carter's expression hardened. "The Hales. Well, come and see the damage up close." Christopher's throat felt tight. "Mrs. Carter, I don't." Elena raised a hand, tubes shifting with the movement. "Don't apologize for things you didn't do, but don't ignore them either." She studied his face with the same intensity her daughter had shown. "Danielle tells me you're offering to make things right. I'm trying to figure out how." "Good answer." Elena's smile was tired but genuine. The wrong answer would have been money fixes everything. Christopher spent the next hour watching Danielle care for her mother. Adjusting pillows, reading magazine articles aloud, making her laugh despite the circumstances. The tenderness between them was something Christopher had never experienced with his own family. His parents had hired staff for emotional labor, nannies for comfort, tutors for education, therapists for problems. Love had been outsourced to professionals, while family dinners remained business meetings in disguise. Watching Danielle's gentle hands and patient voice, Christopher felt a hollowness in his chest he'd never acknowledged. "You're staring," Danielle said without looking up from her mother's chart. I've never seen." He stopped, embarrassed by the admission. "Never seen what?" "A family that actually likes each other." The words hung in the air. Elena and Danielle exchanged a look that said more than conversation. "Money doesn't buy love, baby," Elena said gently. "It just makes loneliness more comfortable." When visiting hours ended, Christopher found himself walking beside Danielle through the hospital parking lot. The setting sun painted everything in gold and orange, but his mind was stuck on the way she touched her mother's forehead, the whispered, "I love you," that had sounded like a prayer. Your mother's insurance, he said suddenly. It was denied by Hale Financial Services. Danielle stopped walking. I know. I can fix that. Retroactive approval, full coverage for all treatments. Christopher. Her voice was warning and invitation at the same time. Don't make this about guilt. Then what should it be about? She turned to face him fully, the parking lot lights creating shadows across her face, making sure no other families go through what mine did. The space between them hummed with electricity. Christopher found himself studying the curve of her lips, remembering how they'd shaped ancient Greek syllables. Wrong time, wrong place, but his body didn't care about appropriateness. The partnership offer, he said. You were serious. Dead serious. Danielle stepped closer, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes. But I need to know you can handle my world before I trust you with my grandfather's legacy. What does that mean exactly? Her smile was mysterious, dangerous. It means tomorrow, you work my schedule. All 3 jobs. No special treatment. No shortcuts. No calling daddy when things get difficult. Christopher's pulse quickened. And if I can't keep up, then you go back to Dallas, and I take my story to the media. She moved closer still, her voice dropping to a whisper that made his skin tingle. But if you can prove you're more than just another rich boy playing dress-up, what then? Danielle's hand brushed against his arm, the contact brief but electric. Then maybe we can build something worth building. As she walked toward her car, Christopher remained standing in the parking lot, watching her figure disappear into the Honda's interior. The engine coughed to life, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Through the windshield, she mouthed words he couldn't hear, but somehow understood. Don't disappoint me. The red taillights faded into Atlanta traffic, leaving Christopher alone with the weight of tomorrow's challenge. He'd run companies worth billions, negotiated deals that moved markets, commanded boardrooms full of men twice his age. But somehow, the thought of keeping up with one determined waitress terrified him more than any hostile takeover. His phone buzzed with texts from his assistant, his lawyers, his father wanting updates on the situation in Atlanta. Christopher turned off the phone without reading them. Tomorrow, he would discover if privilege had prepared him for anything real. Tomorrow, he would learn whether he was worth the partnership Danielle was offering. Tomorrow, the richest man in Dallas would find out what it meant to work for something he couldn't buy. As he walked back toward his hotel, Christopher caught his reflection in a darkened storefront window. He looked the same, expensive haircut, perfect teeth, clothes that cost more than most cars. But something in his eyes had changed. The arrogance was still there, but it was cracking around the edges, letting in light he'd never noticed before. Light that looked suspiciously like hope. And underneath it all, a hunger that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with a woman who'd challenged him to be worthy of her respect. The real test was just beginning. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to prove yourself in someone else's world? What's the hardest thing you've ever worked for that couldn't be bought? Drop your stories below. The man who commanded boardrooms was about to discover that real work happened in kitchens, classrooms, and hospital hallways, and that sweat was more honest than signatures. 4:30 a.m. Christopher's phone alarm sounded like a war cry in the darkness of his hotel room. He'd never been awake this early without cocaine or a crisis. Danielle's text was waiting, corner of Auburn and Boulevard. Don't be late. We're shoes you can stand in for 12 hours. The Auburn Avenue neighborhood looked different in pre-dawn darkness. Street lights revealed a community preparing for another day of hustle. Bus stops filling with workers in uniforms. Coffee shops opening their doors to the early shift crowd. Christopher found Danielle outside a building that looked like it had seen better decades. Her work clothes were practical: black pants, white shirt, sneakers that had been resold multiple times. She handed him a matching outfit. First job, breakfast prep at Mama Rose's kitchen. 6 to 11. You'll be washing dishes, chopping vegetables, whatever needs doing. Her eyes traveled over his soft hands. Try not to cut yourself. The kitchen was chaos with purpose. Steam rose from industrial ranges while cooks moved in choreographed madness, calling out orders in English and Spanish. The smell of bacon grease and coffee filled air thick with urgency. New guy. The head cook, a mountain of a man named Pablo, pointed at Christopher. Dishes. That pile there. Keep up or get out. Christopher had never washed a dish in his life. His hands, smooth from years of office work, developed blisters within the first hour. Hot water, mixed with industrial soap, turned his skin raw. Grease splattered his borrowed shirt, and his feet ached in ways he'd never experienced. But he didn't quit. Danielle worked the morning rush with fluid efficiency, taking orders, delivering plates, managing difficult customers with grace and steel. Christopher watched her between loads of dirty dishes, admiring the way she moved through chaos without letting it touch her calm center. Behind you, hot. Danielle brushed past him carrying plates, her hip bumping his as she navigated the narrow space. The brief contact sent heat through his body that had nothing to do with the kitchen's temperature. You're slow, she said during a brief lull, standing close enough that he caught her scent over the restaurant smells. I'm learning. Christopher's voice was rougher than usual, partly from exhaustion, partly from her proximity. Learning what? That I've been soft my whole life. Her expression softened slightly. Soft isn't the same as weak. When 11 o'clock arrived, Christopher's shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands were pruned and bleeding from small cuts, and every muscle in his back screamed for relief. Job 2, Danielle announced. Tutoring at the community center. Noon to 6. Have you ever worked so hard that your body hurt in places you didn't know existed? Ever pushed through exhaustion for something that mattered? Tell me in the comments about the hardest physical work you've ever done. The community center buzzing with after-school energy. Kids ranging from 6 to 16 filled classrooms where Danielle transformed into something magical. Patient teacher, firm disciplinarian, inspiration wrapped in authority. Mr. Christopher's going to help today, she announced to a room full of skeptical faces. He looked like he'd never been in the hood before, observed Keisha, age 12, with a brutal honesty children wielded like weapons. Then teach him, Danielle said simply. Christopher found himself kneeling beside kids whose math homework was harder than anything he remembered from private school. Their questions came rapid fire, testing his patience and knowledge while small hands tugged at his shirt for attention. Why you talk so proper? Asked Marcus, age 8. Why you smell like fancy soap? Added Destiny, age 10. Why your hands so soft? Keisha again, not letting up. Danielle rescued him with a look that somehow conveyed both amusement and approval. Give him time. Sometimes people surprise you. She moved through the classroom like water, helping with homework, settling disputes, making each child feel heard and valued. When 12-year-old Jaden couldn't understand fractions, she didn't just explain the math. She used pizza slices from her snack time, making learning feel like play. Christopher found himself memorized by her teaching style. Every interaction showed patience he'd never developed, wisdom he'd never needed to acquire. Watching her help these kids felt like watching artistry in motion. You're staring again, she murmured during a bathroom break, standing close enough in the narrow hallway that he could count her eyelashes. You're beautiful when you teach. The words escaped before his filter engaged. Danielle's breath caught. For a moment, her professional composure slipped, revealing something vulnerable underneath. Christopher, I know. Wrong time, wrong place. But he didn't step back, and neither did she. The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Then voices from the classroom called her name, breaking the spell. 6 o'clock brought job 3, evening shift at the hospital. Danielle changed into scrubs that somehow made her even more appealing. Practical clothes that emphasized her curves while demanding respect for her competence. You'll be doing orderly work, she explained as they walked through Grady's corridors. Moving patients, delivering supplies, cleaning rooms. Nothing glamorous. The hospital's night shift was a different world. Emergencies arrived in ambulances. Families waited in anxiety-filled silence. And medical staff moved with purpose born from life and death responsibility. Christopher spent hours pushing wheelchairs, delivering medications, mopping floors that saw more human drama than his boardroom ever had. His muscles screamed from 12 hours of actual labor, but something else was happening. Every task felt meaningful. Every person he helped mattered. The work was honest in ways his corporate wheeling and dealing had never been. "How you holding up?" Danielle appeared beside him during a break, offering a cup of coffee that tasted like salvation. "Everything hurts," Christopher admitted. "But I can't remember the last time I felt this. Useful." She studied his face, noting the exhaustion and something else, a clarity that hadn't been there this morning. "One more hour," she said. "Then we're done." But as she walked away, Christopher realized he wasn't ready for this day to end. For the first time in years, he'd worked for something besides profit. He contributed instead of just consuming. And he'd spent 14 hours watching Danielle Carter move through her world with grace, intelligence, and strength that made his usual conquests seem like pale imitations of real women. When their shift ended at midnight, they stood in a hospital parking lot again, both exhausted, both changed. "So," Danielle's voice held challenge and curiosity. "Think you can handle my reality?" Christopher looked down at his hands, blistered, cut, honest evidence of actual work. "It's harder than anything I've ever done." That wasn't the question. He met her eyes, seeing himself reflected there. Not the CEO, not the millionaire, but just a man who'd survived his first day of real life. "Ask me again tomorrow." Danielle's smile was slow, dangerous, and completely devastating. "Same time, same intensity. We'll see what you're really made of." As she drove away, Christopher remained standing in the darkness, everything aching and alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. His education had just begun. Share below, what's the hardest honest work you've ever done? When did you discover that your body could endure more than your mind believed? Tell me about the time someone challenged you to prove yourself beyond your comfort zone. On day 3, his body was failing, but his resolve was just getting started, and so was the dangerous attraction that threatened to complicate everything. Christopher's alarm became his enemy. Day 3 of Danielle's boot camp, and his body felt like it had been hit by expensive cars. Blisters covered blisters on his hands. His back spasmed when he tried to sit up. Every muscle screamed protests he'd never heard before. But he'd also never slept better in his life. The Honda was waiting outside his hotel, Danielle behind the wheel looking unfairly energetic for someone who'd worked the same brutal schedule. "Morning, sunshine." Her voice held amusement as Christopher limped toward the car. "How we feeling today?" "Like I've been beaten with expensive sticks." Christopher eased into the passenger seat, wincing at every movement. "Good. Pain means you're alive." Danielle pulled into traffic, glancing at his bandaged hands. "Most rich boys tap out by day 2. I'm not most rich boys." "No," she agreed, something shifting in her tone. "You're not." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Today's schedule was different. Instead of the usual 3-job marathon, Danielle drove toward a part of Atlanta Christopher hadn't seen. Older neighborhoods where history lived in every brick and street corner. "Where are we going?" "To understand what your family really stole." Danielle parked outside a modest house with a wraparound porch. "My cousin Marcus still lives in grandfather's old place. He's been waiting to meet you." Marcus Carter was 6'4" and built like he played college football. His handshake nearly broke Christopher's already damaged fingers, and his smile held the kind of warmth that made threats unnecessary. "So you're the Hale boy." Marcus's voice carried 3 generations of Georgia clay. "Heard you've been working honest for change." Trying to start." Marcus led them through the house where Dr. Marcus Carter had lived and worked. But trying don't undo 23 years of theft. The back room took Christopher's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, filled with texts and languages he couldn't identify. Ancient manuscripts sat in protective cases, their pages yellow with age and wisdom. "Grandfather's life work," Danielle said softly. "What survived the theft?" Christopher moved through the room like a man in a museum, touching nothing but absorbing everything. These weren't just books. They were lineage, legacy, proof of intellectual traditions that predated everything he'd been taught about Western civilization. "Your company's logo," Marcus said, pointing to a framed document. See that symbol? That's not Greek. That's a Dinkra, West African writing system. Grandfather traced how Greek philosophy influenced African thought and how African wisdom shaped what Europeans call their own discoveries. The room spun slightly. Christopher's entire corporate identity, the logo, the motto, the brand his marketing team had built into an empire, it was all connected to traditions his business school had never mentioned. He was writing a book, Danielle added. 3 volumes proving that ancient Greek philosophy had African roots. Would have changed how Western education talks about intellectual history. Until your daddy bought those manuscripts from whoever broke into this house. Marcus finished. Use the research to build a company that sells heritage preservation to the government while erasing the heritage that actually mattered. Have you ever discovered that everything you were taught was incomplete? That your education left out crucial parts of the story? Share in the comments about times you learned history that challenged what you thought you knew. Christopher sank into Dr. Carter's old reading chair, overwhelmed by the scope of his family's crime. This wasn't just theft, it was cultural erasure on a massive scale. I need to see everything, he said quietly. For the next 6 hours, Danielle and Marcus walked him through Dr. Carter's research. Ancient texts that proved philosophical concepts attributed to Greek masters had African origins centuries earlier. Trade routes that carried ideas along with goods. Grandfather called it the hidden connections, Danielle explained, her passion for the subject making her eyes light up in ways that made Christopher's chest tight. He wanted to show how human wisdom transcended racial boundaries, how knowledge flowed both ways across cultures. Instead, your family used his work to win government contracts for preserving Western heritage, Marcus added. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so damn tragic. As the afternoon wore on, Christopher found himself watching Danielle more than the manuscripts. The way she handled ancient texts with reverence. How her voice changed when she translated passages that moved her. The unconscious grace with which she moved through her grandfather's intellectual legacy. She caught him staring during a break when Marcus had gone to make coffee. "What?" she asked, but her voice was softer than usual. "You could have been anything." Christopher's voice was rough with realization. "With your intelligence, your education, you could have worked anywhere, done anything. I'm doing what I want to do." Danielle stepped closer, close enough that he could see the pulse at her throat. "Taking care of my family, preserving my grandfather's work, making sure his legacy survives. By working 3 jobs that barely pay rent. By choosing dignity over comfort." Her chin lifted with challenge. "Something you're just learning about." The accusation should have stung. Instead, it felt like recognition. "You're right." Christopher stood, moving closer until they were sharing the same breath. "I've been comfortable my whole life. Safe, insulated, protected from consequences. And now I'm terrified." His honesty surprised them both. "Terrified that I'll disappoint you. Terrified that I'm not capable of being the partner you deserve." Danielle's expression softened. "Fear means you care about the outcome. I care about you." The words hung between them like a bridge over dangerous water. Danielle's breath caught, her professional composure slipping to reveal something vulnerable underneath. "Christopher," her voice was warning and invitation. "I know this complicates things." He reached up, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. "I know this was supposed to be about business." It was. Her voice was barely a whisper. It still is. But she didn't step away from his touch. If anything, she leaned into it, her eyes closing for just a moment as his thumb traced her cheekbone. "Danielle." Marcus's voice from the kitchen broke the spell. "Coffee's ready." They stepped apart, both breathing harder than the moment warranted. The air between them thrummed with electricity and unfinished conversations. "We should," Danielle started. "Yeah." Christopher's voice was rough. "We should," but neither moved immediately. They stood there in Dr. Carter's study, surrounded by stolen wisdom and recovered truth, while something new and dangerous bloomed between them. When Marcus returned with coffee, he took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. Grandfather always said the best partnerships started with respect. "Just respect?" Christopher asked, not looking away from Danielle. Respect first, Marcus clarified. Everything else build from there. As evening approached, Christopher realized he'd survived day 3 without calling his assistant, checking his stock portfolio, or thinking about quarterly projections. His world had shrunk to this room, these people, this woman who was reshaping everything he thought he knew about value. Tomorrow's day 4, Danielle said as they prepared to leave. Halfway point. What happens at the halfway point? Her smile was mysterious, loaded with promise and threat. You decide if you're really ready for this partnership, and I decide if you're worth the risk. Christopher caught her hand as she reached for her keys, his bandaged fingers closing around her wrist. What kind of risk? The kind that changes everything. Her pulse jumped under his touch. The kind that means there's no going back to who we were before. She pulled away gently, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. Get some rest, Christopher. Tomorrow, you meet the real test. As her car pulled away, Christopher stood on the porch of Dr. Carter's house, looking up at stars he'd never noticed from his penthouse windows. His body ached, his hands were destroyed, and his comfortable world was disappearing piece by piece. But for the first time in his privileged life, Christopher Hale felt like he was building something worth the cost. Drop a comment below. When was the last time you worked so hard that everything hurt, but you felt proud of what you accomplished? Have you ever had someone challenge you to become better than you thought possible? Share your transformation stories. Day 4 wasn't about work. It was about walking into her community as an equal, not a savior, and proving he could earn respect he'd never had to fight for. Christopher's reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror showed a man he barely recognized. 3 days of real work had carved new lines around his eyes, and his hands looked like they belonged to someone who actually used them. His expensive haircut was growing out, softening the sharp edges that screamed corporate predator. He liked what he saw. Danielle's text arrived at 7 a.m. Community barbecue today. Auburn Avenue block party. Time to meet the neighborhood. Dress like you belong. Christopher stared at his reflection again. Did he belong anywhere outside boardrooms and country clubs? Today he'd find out. The block party was already in full swing when Danielle picked him up. The Honda's windows were down, gospel music flowing from speakers that had probably cost less than his morning coffee habit. But the music moved through him in ways his expensive sound system never had. Raw, honest, full of soul he'd never learned to appreciate. Nervous? Danielle asked, noting how his leg bounced during the short drive. Terrified. Christopher's honesty was becoming a habit around her. Good. Fear keeps you humble. Auburn Avenue was transformed. The street had been blocked off, filled with tables covered in red checkered cloths, grills sending smoke signals to heaven, and families spanning multiple generations sharing food and stories. Children ran between adults, their laughter mixing with conversations and voices that carried history and hope. Danielle, a woman's voice rang out as they approached. Baby girl, you made it. The community welcomed Danielle like returning royalty. Hugs, kisses on cheeks, hands reaching to touch her arms and face with affection that spoke of genuine love. Christopher stood slightly apart, watching her transform in their presence. This was Danielle in her element. Not the professional waitress, not the patient teacher, but the beloved daughter of a community that had raised her, supported her, celebrated her victories, and mourned her struggles. Everyone, Danielle's voice carried over the crowd. This is Christopher. He's learning about real life this week. The introduction was simple, but the silence that followed was loaded. Eyes assessed him, not with hostility, but with the kind of careful evaluation reserved for strangers who might or might not prove worthy of their daughter's time. Christopher. An elderly man stepped forward, his voice carrying authority that money couldn't buy. Reverend Williams. I knew your grandfather. Christopher's blood froze. My grandfather? Thomas Hale. He came through here back in the 70s, looking to buy property cheap when the neighborhood was struggling. The Reverend's smile held no warmth. Made promises about development that would help the community. Instead, he bought up buildings and let them rot until property values crashed, then sold to developers who pushed out families that had lived here for generations. The crowd had grown quiet, listening to history being shared like family stories around a dinner table. I didn't know, Christopher said, his voice barely audible. Course you didn't. This came from a woman Christopher's age, holding a baby while balancing a plate of food. Rich folks don't tell their children how the money really got made. Have you ever learned something about your family that changed how you saw yourself? Ever discovered that your comfort came at someone else's expense? Tell me in the comments how you'd handle learning your legacy was built on harm. So what are you going to do about it? Asked a teenager whose eyes held challenge and curiosity in equal measure. All faces turned toward Christopher. The question wasn't hostile, it was honest. A community that had been burned by promises before, waiting to see if this hail would be different. Christopher looked at Danielle, finding strength in her steady gaze. I'm going to return what my family stole, and then I'm going to spend whatever it takes to repair the damage. With what money? The teenager wasn't backing down. Your daddy's blood money? With partnership. Danielle stepped closer to Christopher, her presence offering support he hadn't expected. Christopher's company has resources. I have vision. Together, we're going to build something that honors the people who were hurt. And what makes you think he won't disappear when things get complicated? The woman with the baby voiced what everyone was thinking. Christopher felt every eye on him, felt the weight of generations of broken promises from people who looked like him. But he also felt Danielle's hand brush against his arm. Brief contact that steadied him. Because I'm not my grandfather or my father. His voice grew stronger with each word. Because I've spent 3 days learning what real work feels like, and I'm not going back to comfort built on other people's suffering. Pretty words, Reverend Williams observed. But words are cheap. Actions cost something. Then let me prove it. Christopher reached into his back pocket, pulling out a folded document. Deed transfer for the 3 buildings my grandfather bought in this neighborhood. They're yours now. Community-owned, rent-controlled. Profits go back to local schools and programs. The silence stretched long enough for the gospel music from someone's radio to fill the space. You serious? The teenager's skepticism was wavering. Dead serious. Christopher handed the deed to Reverend Williams. It's a start. Not enough, but a start. As the Reverend examined the legal documents, Danielle moved closer to Christopher, her shoulder brushing his arm. The contact sent electricity through his exhausted body. That was your inheritance from your grandfather, she murmured. Good. Christopher's voice was rough. Let go to people who deserve it. The crowd began to move again, conversations resuming, but now the energy felt different. Cautiously hopeful instead of suspicious. Children ran between the adults, and someone pressed a plate of food into Christopher's hands. You eat barbecue before? Asked an older woman whose arms were strong from decades of honest work. Not like this, Christopher admitted, taking a bite that made his eyes water from spice and flavor he'd never experienced. Food tastes better when it's made with love instead of hired help, she observed, watching his reaction with satisfaction. As the afternoon wore on, Christopher found himself drawn into conversations that taught him more than his MBA ever had. Stories about community resilience, family traditions, dreams deferred but never abandoned. These people had built lives of meaning with resources he spent on single meals. And through it all, Danielle watched him. Not with the suspicion she'd shown earlier, but with something that looked dangerously like approval. You're different here, she said during a quiet moment when they'd stepped away from the crowd. Different how? Smaller. In a good way. Danielle leaned against a fence, studying his face. Like you're finally fitting into your own skin instead of wearing it like a costume. Christopher moved closer, drawn by honesty that felt more intimate than any physical encounter. Is that what you wanted? To make me smaller? I wanted to make you real. Her voice dropped to a whisper that made his pulse quicken. The question is, do you like who you're becoming? He studied her face in the afternoon light. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, features that belonged in museums celebrating classical beauty. But it was her mind that captivated him, the way she saw through his surface to possibilities he'd never imagined. I like who I am when I'm with you, he admitted. Danielle's breath caught. Christopher, I know this complicates things. He reached up, his damaged fingers barely grazing her cheek. I know this was supposed to be about justice. It still is. But she didn't step away from his touch. Justice and something else. What else? Her eyes searched his face, looking for something she seemed to find. Recognition. Respect. The kind of partnership that builds something bigger than what either person could create alone. Christopher's thumb traced her cheekbone, marveling at skin that felt like silk despite her practical life. Is that what this is? Partnership. Getting there. Danielle's voice was breathless. But there's one more test. What test? Her smile was mysterious, loaded with promise and danger. Tomorrow night. My world, your choice. Prove you can handle all of me, not just the parts that fit your comfort zone. Before Christopher could ask what she meant, Marcus called from the porch. Y'all coming back? Mrs. Johnson made her famous peach cobbler, and it's disappearing fast. As they walked back toward the community, Danielle's hand brushed against Christopher's, their fingers intertwining for just a moment. The contact was brief, but it sent heat through his body that had nothing to do with the George's son. One more test, she repeated softly. Christopher squeezed her hand before letting go. I'm ready. But as they rejoined the celebration, both knew that tomorrow would determine whether their partnership remained professional or became something that would change both their lives forever. The barbecue continued around them, but the air between Christopher and Danielle hummed with possibility and danger. Whatever tomorrow's test involved, it would either prove he was worthy of her trust or destroy the fragile connection they'd built. Share below. When was the last time someone challenged you to prove yourself beyond your comfort zone? Have you ever felt yourself changing because of who you were with? Tell me about the moment you realized someone was seeing parts of you that others missed. She invited him to her apartment, not as a test of endurance, but as a test of character. And what happened next would either destroy their partnership or transform it into something neither had planned. Christopher's final day of boot camp passed in a blur of familiar routines that no longer felt foreign. His hands moved efficiently through kitchen prep, his back no longer spasmed when lifting patients, and the children at the community center high-fived him like he'd always belonged. But his mind was elsewhere, focused on Danielle's promise. Tomorrow night. My world, your choice. When their hospital shift ended at midnight, Christopher expected the usual ride back to his hotel. Instead, Danielle drove through neighborhoods that grew quieter, more residential, until she pulled into the parking lot of a modest apartment complex. This is me, she said, killing the engine. Christopher looked up at the building. 3 stories of red brick, external staircases, the kind of place where real people lived real lives. No dormo, no valet, no joy hide your lobby. Just home. You're inviting me up? I'm offering you the chance to see who I really am. Danielle's voice carried weight that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with trust. Not the waitress, not the teacher, not the granddaughter carrying legacy. Just me. Her apartment was small but immaculate. Furniture that had been chosen for comfort over style, bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages, photographs covering every surface, family, friends, moments of joy captured and displayed like treasures. This is beautiful, Christopher said, meaning it. It's honest. Danielle moved through her space with unconscious grace, switching on lamps that cast warm pools of light. No interior decorator, no expensive art bought for investment. Just things that matter to me. Christopher studied the photographs. Danielle graduating from Emory, her grandfather teaching her to read ancient texts, her mother laughing at some family joke. Lives lived fully despite financial limitations. You want something to drink? Danielle asked from the small kitchen. Whatever you're having. She returned with 2 glasses of wine. Not expensive vintage, but something honest that tasted like celebration rather than status. They sat on her couch, the space between them humming with 4 days of building tension. So, Danielle said, tucking her legs under her. Final evaluation. Think you can handle real life? Christopher considered the question seriously. My hand will probably never be soft again. My back discovered muscles I didn't know existed. And I've learned more in 4 days than I did in 4 years of business school. That's not what I asked. Can I handle real life? Christopher met her eyes. I can handle your life. Working beside you, learning from you, building something meaningful instead of just profitable. Have you ever had someone see straight through your defenses to who you really are underneath? Ever felt simultaneously terrified and excited by that kind of recognition? Drop a comment about the moment someone saw your authentic self. And what about this? Danielle gestured between them, acknowledging the attraction that had been building like storm pressure. Can you handle wanting someone you can't buy? Christopher's breath caught. Is that what you think? That I want to buy you? Men like you usually do. But her voice held less conviction than her words. I'm not other men. Christopher set down his wine, turning to face her fully. I don't want to buy you, Danielle. I want to earn you. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. Earn me how? By being worthy of your respect, your trust, He stopped, the next word too dangerous to speak. My what? Christopher's eyes searched her face. Your heart. The admission hung between them like a confession. Danielle's wine glass trembled in her hands as she set it down. This was supposed to be about business, she whispered. It still is. Christopher moved closer, near enough to count her eyelashes. But somewhere between yesterday and today, it became about something else too. What else? You. His voice was rough with want and honesty. Everything about you. Your strength, your intelligence, the way you move through the world like you belong everywhere you go. Danielle's breath was coming faster now. Christopher, I know this complicates everything. His hand reached up, fingers barely grazing her cheek. I know you have every reason not to trust me. I don't. Her voice was barely audible. Trust you, I mean. Then why did you bring me here? Danielle leaned into his touch despite her words. Because I want to. The confession broke something loose between them. Christopher's other hand found her face, cradling it like something precious and fragile. I've never wanted anything I couldn't have, he admitted. Never worked for anything that mattered. Never met anyone who made me want to be better than I was. And now I'd give up everything I own for the chance to deserve you. Danielle's eyes closed as his thumb traced her cheekbone. That's not how this works. How it works. Earning someone. Her eyes opened, meeting his with intensity that made his chest tight. You don't earn people, Christopher. You become worthy of choosing each other. Choose me, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. I'm trying to. Her voice shook slightly. But I need to know you're choosing me too. Not the challenge, not the redemption story, not the way I make you feel like a better man. Me. Christopher's answer came in the form of a kiss. Gentle at first, questioning, giving her space to pull away. But when her lips moved against his, when her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, gentleness transformed into hunger. She tasted like wine and possibility, like everything he'd been missing without knowing it. Her body was soft where his was hard, curves that fit against him like they'd been designed for this moment. Danielle, he breathed against her mouth. I know. Her voice was shaky, her hands trembling as they explored the muscles his week of labor had awakened. I know this changes everything. Does it change your answer? Christopher pulled back enough to see her face. About the partnership? Danielle studied his expression, the vulnerability he was finally letting her see, the want he couldn't hide, the hope he'd never had to fight for before. Ask me again tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow. Her smile was slow, dangerous, and completely devastating. When you've proven you can want me and respect me at the same time. As Christopher sat back, his heart hammering against his ribs, Danielle curled into the corner of the couch, her lips still swollen from their kiss. One more day, she said. Then you decide if you're really ready for this partnership. And I decide if I'm ready to trust a Hale with my grandfather's legacy. Christopher reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers like he was making a promise. What happens tomorrow? You meet my mother. You see where I come from, who shaped me, what I'm fighting to protect. Danielle's voice grew serious. And you decide if you're ready to be part of a family that doesn't measure love in dollar signs. As they sat together in her small apartment, surrounded by her honest life and the taste of possibility still on their lips, Both knew they'd crossed a line that would change everything. The partnership was no longer just about business. It was about building something worth the risk of loving someone you couldn't control, couldn't buy, couldn't live without once you'd found them. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt that moment when friendship turned into something deeper? When business became personal? When you realized you were falling for someone who could either save you or destroy you? Share your stories below. Some conversations change your life not because of what's said, but because for the first time, you stop hiding from the truth about who you really are. Christopher woke before his alarm, body sore but mind clear. Day 5, the final test. Whatever happened today would determine whether he returned to Dallas as the same man who'd left or stayed in Atlanta as someone completely different. Danielle picked him up at dawn, but today felt different. She wore a simple dress that made her look softer, younger, and her usual professional armor had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like nervousness. "You okay?" Christopher asked as they drove through familiar neighborhoods. "My mother's dying." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Kidney failure. She's been on the transplant list for 2 years, but her insurance keeps finding reasons to delay approval for the surgery." Christopher's chest tightened. "Hale Financial Services, your company's medical subsidiary." Danielle's voice held no accusation, just tired acceptance. "So why bring you to meet her? Understand that you're looking at the human cost of your family's business model." They pulled into the driveway of a small house that had been maintained with obvious care despite limited resources. The front porch held potted plants and a swing that looked well used. Wind chimes created gentle music in the morning breeze. "She doesn't know about the manuscripts," Danielle said as they sat in the parked car. "About your family's connection to grandfather's death. I didn't want to add that stress to everything else she's carrying." "What does she know?" "That you're the man who's been working beside me this week. That you're considering a business partnership." Danielle turned to face him. "That I'm starting to care about you in ways that scare me." The admission hung between them like a bridge over dangerous water. "Danielle, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say anything you can't take back." "Not yet." They walked to the front door together, Christopher's heart hammering against his ribs. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced hostile board meetings, survived corporate warfare that would have destroyed weaker men. But meeting Danielle's dying mother felt like the most important moment of his life. Elena Carter opened the door before they could knock. 53 years old, thin from illness, but still beautiful in ways that explained where Danielle had inherited her grace. Her eyes held the same intelligence, the same strength wrapped in kindness. "So you're Christopher." Elena's voice was warm but assessing. "Come in, baby. Coffee's fresh." The living room was small but filled with light from windows that had been positioned to catch the morning sun. Family photographs covered every surface, and books were stacked on tables like old friends waiting for conversation. "Danielle tells me you've been learning about real work this week." Elena settled into a chair that was clearly her favorite, worn smooth by years of use. "Yes, ma'am." Christopher chose his words carefully. "Your daughter's been an excellent teacher. She's good at that." Elena's smile was proud. Always was, even as a little girl. Taught herself to read before kindergarten, using her grandfather's books. "Have you ever met someone's parent and felt like you were being evaluated for more than friendship? Ever sat in a room where every family photo told a story of love that money couldn't buy? Share in the comments about meeting the family that changed your perspective. Tell me about yourself, Christopher. Elena's request was gentle but direct. Not the business stuff, the real stuff. Christopher found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone. Growing up in a house where staff outnumbered family members. Parents who scheduled appointments to see their own son. Achievements measured in stock prices rather than personal growth. "Sounds lonely," Elena observed. It was. The admission surprised him with its honesty. "I didn't realize how lonely until this week." And now, Christopher glanced at Danielle, who was listening from the kitchen doorway, her expression unreadable. "Now I'm learning what connection actually feels like." Elena followed his gaze, noting the way her daughter's breath caught at his words. "Connection's a dangerous thing, baby." It requires trust. I know. Do you? Elena leaned forward, her voice growing serious. Because my daughter's been hurt before. Men who promised things they couldn't deliver. Men who saw her intelligence as a challenge instead of a gift. I'm not those men. Prove it. Elena's words were challenge and invitation. Not with money or grand gestures. Prove it by showing up. Every day. When things get difficult, when the novelty wears off, when being part of her world stops feeling like an adventure and starts feeling like responsibility. Christopher met her eyes, seeing where Danielle had learned to look straight through pretense to truth. I want that responsibility. What? The question was simple, but the answer was everything. Christopher looked around the room. At photographs showing a family that celebrated small victories, at books that had been read and loved instead of displayed, at a woman dying from an illness his company could have treated but chose not to. Because for the first time in my life, I want to build something that matters more than profit margins. His voice grew stronger with each word. Because your daughter showed me that real wealth isn't about what you own. It's about what you're worth to the people who matter. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was reading a book written in a language she'd been fluent in for decades. Danielle, she called softly. Come sit with us. Danielle joined them on the couch, close enough to Christopher that their thighs touched. The contact was innocent, but it sent electricity through his body. Tell him about the foundation idea, Elena said. Mama. Tell him. Danielle took a breath, her hands twisting in her lap. I've been working on a proposal. Using resources from our partnership to create something new. Not charity, not handouts. Investment in communities that have been overlooked. Her passion transformed her face as she spoke. Christopher found himself leaning closer, drawn by her vision and the fire in her voice. Educational programs that celebrate diverse intellectual traditions. Medical centers that serve communities instead of profit margins. Business development that empowers local ownership instead of outside exploitation. Your grandfather's dream, Christopher realized. His dream made real. Danielle's eyes shined with possibility. Using your family's resources to repair the damage your family caused. Christopher reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers like he was making a vow. Yes. Yes what? Yes to the foundation. Yes to the partnership. Yes to spending my privilege on something worthy of the cost. Christopher's thumb traced circles across her knuckles. Yes to you. Elena watched their joined hands with a mother's eyes that missed nothing. You sure about this, baby? Both of you. Danielle looked at Christopher, really looked at him. For days had changed his face, softened the sharp edges of entitlement, added lines around his eyes that spoke of work and worry and genuine emotion. I'm sure about the partnership, she said carefully. And the rest. Danielle's free hand reached up, her fingers tracing the stubble that had replaced his perfectly groomed appearance. The rest is dangerous. Good dangerous or bad dangerous? Christopher's voice was rough with want. I don't know yet. Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, the touch so gentle it made him shiver. But I want to find out. Elena cleared her throat softly. I think that's my cue to let y'all figure this out. As her mother disappeared into the bedroom, Danielle and Christopher remained on the couch, hands intertwined, faces close enough to share breath. 5 days ago, you were just another rich man trying to humiliate me, Danielle whispered. 5 days ago, you were going to destroy my empire. And now, Christopher's answer came in the form of a kiss, deeper than the night before, hungrier, full of promises neither had planned to make. Danielle melted against him, her body fitting into his arms like it had been designed for this moment. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Now, Christopher said, his voice rough with want and certainty, we build something together. But as they sat together in her small apartment, surrounded by her honest life and the taste of possibility on their lips, both knew they'd crossed another line. The partnership was no longer just about justice. It was about two people discovering that the most dangerous thing you could do was fall for someone who made you want to become worthy of their love. Share below. When did you know that business had become personal? That partnership had become something deeper? Tell me about the moment you realized you were falling for someone who would change your life forever. When he walked into that Dallas boardroom with her beside him, everyone learned that some partnerships are worth more than profit margins, and some women are worth risking everything to keep. The flight back to Dallas felt like traveling between two different planets. Christopher sat in first class for the first time in a week, but the luxury felt foreign against skin that had learned to appreciate simple comforts. Beside him, Danielle studied the city below through the airplane window like she was mapping enemy territory. Second thoughts? Christopher asked, noting the tension in her shoulders. Third and fourth thoughts. Danielle's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed nervousness. I've never been in a boardroom before. You've been preparing for this your whole life. Christopher caught her hand, intertwining their fingers. Your grandfather's research, your education, your vision. You're more qualified than half the men in that room. Half. Fina. More qualified than all of them. Danielle's smile was quick, nervous. What if they don't take me seriously? Then they're idiots. Christopher lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. But more importantly, what if they do? The question hung between them as Dallas sprawled below. Christopher's kingdom of glass towers and endless ambition, now viewed through eyes that had learned to see differently. Hale Industries occupied 15 floors of downtown Dallas's most expensive real estate. Christopher's corner office commanded views of the city he'd been born to rule. But as the elevator climbed toward the executive level, he found himself seeing his empire through Danielle's perspective. Holy! Danielle breathed as the elevator doors opened onto polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Over the top, Christopher asked, completely. But her voice held appreciation rather than judgment. Your grandfather and father really went all out with the stolen money. The observation should have stung. Instead, it made Christopher laugh, the first genuine laughter these halls had heard in years. Mr. Hale. His assistant appeared like she'd been waiting behind the elevator doors. The board's assembled in conference room A. They're curious about your guest. Let them be curious. Christopher's arm found Danielle's waist, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. Time for introductions. Conference room A held 12 men in identical expensive suits, faces that had perfected the art of looking skeptical about everything. They stood as Christopher entered, but their eyes fixed on Danielle with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed interest. Gentlemen, Christopher's voice carried new authority. Meet Danielle Carter, my new business partner. The silence that followed was deafening. Partner, Richard Blackstone, the board chairman, found his voice first. Christopher, we weren't aware you were considering 50-50 partnership in all heritage preservation contracts. Christopher's interruption was sharp, final. Ms. Carter brings expertise we've been lacking. What kind of expertise? The question came from James Morrison, Christopher's father's oldest friend and the man most invested in maintaining status quo. Danielle stood, her presence commanding attention in ways that had nothing to do with her simple black dress. The kind that ensures your company actually preserves heritage instead of exploiting it. Have you ever walked into a room where you clearly didn't belong and decided to take up space anyway? Ever faced a group of people who underestimated you before you even spoke? Tell me in the comments about times you proved doubters wrong. I beg your pardon? Morrison's voice dripped condescension. Your company's mission statement mentions wisdom through heritage. Danielle's voice was calm, professional, devastating. But your current projects preserve buildings while ignoring the people who gave them meaning. You're saving structures while erasing stories. Ms. Carter, Blackstone's smile was patronizing. While we appreciate your perspective, this company has operated successfully for over 20 years using proven methodologies, built on stolen research. Danielle's interruption was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Every face turned toward her. Christopher felt his pulse quicken, not from fear but from pride. She was magnificent, intelligent, confident, completely unintimidated by their expensive suits and practiced intimidation. I'm sorry. Morrison's voice was dangerous now. Danielle reached into her briefcase. pulling out copies of documents that made Christopher's blood sing with anticipation and terror. Dr. Marcus Carter's original research. The manuscripts your founder used to develop this company's entire philosophical framework. She distributed copies around the table, her movements graceful and deliberate. Ancient Greek translations, African intellectual traditions, philosophical connections that predate your corporate motto by centuries. These are forgeries, Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Authenticated by 3 independent experts. Danielle's smile was razor-sharp. Along with police reports from 2001 documenting the theft, insurance claims that were mysteriously denied, and a paper trail connecting the stolen materials to this company's sudden rebranding. The room erupted in overlapping voices, denial, anger, legal threats, and panic blending into corporate chaos. Christopher stood, his presence commanding silence. She's telling the truth. Every eye turned toward him. Christopher, Blackstone's voice was warning. You need to think carefully about what you're saying. I've had a week to think. Christopher moved to stand beside Danielle, his hand finding the small of her back. This company was built on stolen intellectual property. We've profited for 23 years using research that belonged to Dr. Carter. Even if that were true, Morrison started. It is true. Christopher's voice was steel. And we're going to make it right. By doing what exactly? By transforming this company into something worthy of the wisdom we stole. Danielle stepped forward, her vision taking center stage. Heritage preservation that includes all heritage. Community development that empowers local ownership. Educational programs that celebrate intellectual diversity. And if we refuse? Blackstone's question was pure threat. Danielle's smile was devastating. Then Monday morning, every major news outlet received copies of these documents, along with a very detailed story about corporate fraud and cultural appropriation. The silence stretched long enough for the air conditioning to sound like hurricane winds. You're talking about fundamentally changing our business model, Morrison said slowly. I'm talking about evolution or extinction. Danielle's voice was calm, final. Your choice. Christopher watched 12 powerful men realize they'd been outmaneuvered by a woman they'd dismissed on sight. The irony was delicious. There's one more thing, Christopher said, drawing attention back to himself. Effective immediately, I'm transferring 49% of my personal shares to Ms. Carter. You can't be serious. Blackstone's face was red with fury. Dead serious. Christopher reached in a high. Christopher, Morrison's voice was pleading now. Think about what you're doing. Your father built this company. My father built this company on stolen foundations. Christopher's interruption was final. I'm building something that will last because it's built on truth. Danielle's hand found his arm, her touch steadying and electric at the same time. We're building something, she corrected softly. The correction made something shift in Christopher's chest. We. Partnership. Equal ground. Vote. Christopher said to the room. Accept Ms. Carter as equal partner, or I sell my remaining shares to our biggest competitor and take her expertise with me. The threat was nuclear. Hale Industries, without Christopher's leadership and ownership, would crumble within months. All in favor. Blackstone's voice was defeat disguised as procedure. 12 hands rose reluctantly. Motion carries. Christopher's smile was victory and vindication. Welcome to the board, partner. As the room cleared of suits and suppressed fury, Christopher and Danielle remained standing by the conference table, surrounded by the documents that had just changed everything. We did it, Danielle whispered, disbelief and triumph mixing in her voice. You did it. Christopher turned to face her fully. You walked into my world and took it apart piece by piece until there was nothing left but truth. And now we build something worth building. Christopher's hands found her face, cradling it like something precious. Together, Danielle's eyes searched his expression. Equal partners? Equal partners. His thumb traced her cheekbone. In business and what? Christopher's answer came in the form of a kiss that tasted like victory and promise and dangerous possibility. Danielle melted against him, her body fitting into his arms like they'd been designed for this moment. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "The conference room probably has cameras," Danielle whispered against his mouth. "Let them watch." Christopher's voice was rough with want. "Let them see what it looks like when someone chooses partnership over power." As they kissed again, surrounded by the corporate kingdom Christopher had inherited and the truth Danielle had brought to transform it, both knew their lives had just changed forever. The partnership was sealed. The attraction was undeniable. Now, they had to figure out if they could build an empire and a relationship at the same time. Tell me below, have you ever taken a risk that changed everything? Ever walked into a room full of people who underestimated you and proved them all wrong? Share your victory stories in the comments. They said love couldn't survive business partnerships, but whoever said that had never watched two people build an empire on mutual respect and shared desire for justice. 2 weeks later, the transformation of Hale Industries was making headlines across the business world. CEO partners with granddaughter of man, his company wronged, read like a modern fairy tale, but the financial press treated it like a corporate disaster. Christopher's stock portfolio had lost 30% of its value. 3 board members had resigned. His father called twice daily with threats disguised as concern. Christopher had never been happier. "The Atlanta project is ahead of schedule," Danielle announced from across his desk, which had become their desk. She claimed the chair across from his, turning his private office into a collaborative workspace that hummed with productive energy. "How ahead? Construction starts next month instead of next spring." Danielle's smile was pure satisfaction. Turns out when you actually listen to community input during planning, projects move faster. Christopher leaned back, admiring the woman who'd become his equal in every way that mattered. 2 weeks of working together had revealed depths to her intelligence he was still discovering. She approached business with the same methodical brilliance she'd used to preserve her grandfather's legacy. "The board's not happy about the timeline," he said. "The board's not happy about anything." Danielle's laugh was musical. "Morrison asked my secretary if I was temporary yesterday. What did she tell him? That I'm as permanent as death and taxes, and considerably more pleasant than either." Christopher's laugh filled the office, genuine sound that these walls had rarely heard. "I love your secretary. She loves you too. Says you're the first CEO she's met who actually reads the reports instead of just signing them. I read them because you write them." Christopher's voice grew serious. "Everything you touch becomes more real, more honest." Danielle looked up from her laptop, catching something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. "Christopher, I know we agreed to keep things professional during business hours." He stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough to see gold flecks in her dark eyes. "But it's after 6. Barely. Still counts." His hands found her face, thumbs tracing cheekbones that had become familiar territory. "How much longer are we going to pretend this is just business? Have you ever tried to separate professional attraction from personal desire? Ever worked so closely with someone that the lines blurred beyond recognition? Share in the comments about workplace relationships that changed everything. "We have employees depending on us," Danielle said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Responsibilities. We have responsibilities to ourselves too." Christopher's mouth was inches from hers. "To be honest about what's happening between us. What is happening between us? You know what?" His voice was rough with want and honesty. "The question is whether you're brave enough to acknowledge it." Danielle's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her words pushed back. "Brave enough? I'm the one who walked into your world and turned it upside down, and I'm the one falling in love with you for it." The words escaped before Christopher could stop them. Love, the one word that changed everything, made every business partnership personal, every professional boundary meaningless. Danielle's breath caught. "Christopher, I love you." Saying it again made it more real, more dangerous. "I love your intelligence, your strength, the way you see through my nonsense to who I could become. We've known each other 2 weeks. I've known myself my whole life, and I've never felt this clear about anything." Christopher's forehead rested against hers. Tell me you don't feel it too. Danielle's hands trembled as they framed his face. I feel it. Then stop fighting it. I'm not fighting it. Her voice was whisper soft. I'm terrifying of it. Why? Because loving you means trusting you. Danielle's eyes were bright with unshed tears. And trusting men with money has never worked out well for the women in my family. The pain in her voice made Christopher's chest ache. I'm not other men. Prove it. How? Danielle stepped back, putting professional distance between them even as her body protested the separation. Show me this isn't just guilt or gratitude or the thrill of slumming with the help. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Is that what you think this is? I think you're a man who's never been told no. Danielle's voice was steady, but Christopher caught the hurt underneath. I think transformation looks good on you right now. But what happens when the novelty wears off? It won't. How do you know? Christopher moved closer again, drawn by needs stronger than logic. Because you make me want to be worthy of you. Not for a week or a month, but for everything that comes after. And what comes after? I don't know. His honesty was brutal, beautiful. I've never planned beyond quarterly projections. But with you, I want to build something that lasts generations. Danielle studied his face, looking for lies or manipulation, and finding only raw truth that made her chest tight with possibility. The foundation launches next month, she said quietly. Our foundation, equal partnership, in everything. Christopher's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Business, vision, whatever this is becoming between us. This is becoming dangerous. Good dangerous or bad dangerous? Danielle's smile was slow, loaded with promise and threat. Ask me again when you've proven you can handle all of me. Before Christopher could ask what she meant, their moment was interrupted by his assistant's voice through the intercom. Mr. Hale? Your father's on line 1. He says it's urgent. Christopher and Danielle exchanged looks. His father's calls had become increasingly hostile as news of the partnership spread through Dallas social circles. Take it, Danielle said. I'll wait. Christopher hit the speaker button. Dad, boy, what the hell do you think you're doing? Harold Hale's voice filled the office like an expensive perfume covering the smell of decay. Giving away half your company to some waitress from Atlanta? Dr. Carter's granddaughter, Christopher corrected. And she's my equal partner now. Equal. Harold's laugh was bitter. Son, you've lost your mind. This girl's playing you like a fiddle, using guilt and whatever else she's got to manipulate you into. Into what? Christopher's voice was dangerous now. Into thinking with your lower brain instead of your business sense. Danielle's face went cold. Christopher's hands clenched into fists. Dad, Christopher's voice was quiet, deadly. Apologize. Now. For what? Speaking truth? This partnership's going to destroy everything I built. Everything you built was stolen. Christopher's interruption was final. And if you ever speak about Danielle that way again, you'll discover just how much power she really has. Are you threatening me? I'm choosing her. The words rang with finality. Over you, over the board, over every expectation you ever had from me. She's my partner now. Get used to it. Christopher ended the call, silence settling over the office like dust after an explosion. Well, Danielle said quietly. That went well. I'm sorry. Christopher's voice was rough with anger and embarrassment. He had no right. He had every right. Danielle moved closer, her hand finding his chest over his heart. He's protecting what he thinks is his. The question is, are you protecting what's yours? You're not mine. Christopher's hand covered hers, holding it against his heartbeat. You're your own person, making your own choices. And what choice am I making? Christopher studied her face, noting the way her pulse jumped at her throat, the way her breathing had quickened during their confrontation with his father. The choice to trust me. His voice was rough with want and hope, despite every reason not to. Maybe Danielle's free hand traced the line of his jaw. Or maybe I'm choosing to take what I want instead of what's safe. What do you want? Her answer came in the form of a kiss that tasted like victory and promise and dangerous possibility. Christopher's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him until there was no space between their bodies, no distance between their hearts. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I want you," Danielle whispered against his mouth. "Not your money, not your power, not what you can do for my community. You have me." Christopher's voice was rough with certainty. "All of me. Forever." Forever's a long time for a man who's never committed to anything longer than a fiscal quarter. "Then it's a good thing I'm not that man anymore." As they kissed again, surrounded by the corporate kingdom, they were transforming together. Both knew they'd crossed the final line between business and personal, between partnership and love. The foundation would launch. The community would heal. Justice would be served. But more than that, two people who'd found each other across impossible circumstances had chosen to build something that would last longer than profit margins or quarterly reports. They were building love that could survive success. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and following your heart? When did you realize that the person challenging you was also the person you couldn't live without? Share your stories about love that changed everything. She invited him to her bed, not as conquest, but as surrender, proving that sometimes the most powerful thing a strong woman can do is show a good man her vulnerability. 3 months into their partnership, the Carter Hale Foundation had become Atlanta's most talked about development project. Community centers, medical clinics, and educational programs were rising from neighborhoods that had been written off by city planners for decades. But as their professional success grew, the tension between Christopher and Danielle had become almost unbearable. They worked together 12 hours a day, their chemistry electric across conference tables and construction sites. Stolen glances during meetings, hands that lingered when passing documents, conversations that stopped just short of confession. Everyone could see it. The staff whispered about the way Christopher looked at Danielle when she presented ideas. Board members noted how her laugh could change his entire demeanor during tense negotiations. But they maintained professional boundaries with religious dedication, even as every shared moment charged the air between them with possibilities neither dared acknowledge. Until tonight, Christopher was working late in his penthouse office when Danielle appeared in the doorway, still in the dress she'd worn to their community meeting. But something was different. Her usual professional composure had been replaced by something raw, vulnerable. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice unsteady. "What's wrong?" Christopher was on his feet immediately, crossing to her with concern written across his features. "My mother got the call today." Danielle's voice was barely audible. "They found a kidney match." Christopher's heart soared. "That's incredible news. Why do you look?" "The surgery's scheduled for next week." Danielle's eyes were bright with tears she was fighting not to shed. "But there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The donor backed out. Changed their mind last minute." Danielle's composure finally cracked, tears spilling over despite her efforts. "The medical team says they might not find another match in time." Christopher's arms were around her before conscious thought engaged, pulling her against his chest while she finally let herself break. Her tears soaked through his expensive shirt, but he didn't care about anything except the woman falling apart in his arms. "We'll find another donor," he said into her hair. "Whatever it costs, however long it takes." "You can't buy everything, Christopher." Danielle's voice was muffled against his chest. "Some things are beyond money. Not this." Christopher's voice was fierce with determination. "Not your mother. Not when I have resources to help." Danielle pulled back enough to look at his face, noting the intensity in his eyes. "Why?" "Because she's your mother." The answer was simple, devastating. "Because you love her. Because losing her would destroy you, and I can't watch that happen. Even though you barely know her, I know she raised the woman I'm falling in love with." Christopher's thumb wiped tears from her cheeks. "That makes her precious to me, too. Have you ever had someone care about the people you love just because they matter to you? Ever experienced that moment when you realize someone would fight your battles alongside you? Tell me in the comments about love that extended to your whole world." "Christopher." Danielle's voice was shaky with emotion and something else. "What?" "Take me home. I'll drive you." "No." Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. "Take me to your home." Christopher's breath caught. Danielle, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Her eyes met his with intensity that made his pulse race. For 3 months, we've been dancing around this. Professional boundaries, appropriate behavior, all the rules that keep us safe and separate. Because mixing business and personal is exactly what we've been doing since the moment we met. Danielle stepped closer, close enough that her body pressed against his. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. Christopher's hands found her waist, holding her against him while his mind raced through implications. If we do this, we'll figure it out. Danielle's voice was breathless, determined. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want you. Tired of fighting attraction that gets stronger every day. You're sure? Her answer came in the form of a kiss that was nothing like their careful, professional restraint. This was hunger unleashed, one that had been building for months, finally given permission to burn. Christopher's penthouse apartment felt different with Danielle in it. The expensive furniture and artwork that usually impressed visitors seemed irrelevant compared to the woman who moved through his space like she was claiming territory. "This is where you live," she said, taking in floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Dallas like a private kingdom. "This is where I sleep," Christopher corrected, watching her reflection in the glass. "I've never really lived anywhere." "What's the difference?" "Living requires someone worth coming home to." Danielle turned from the window, studying his face in the soft lighting. "Is that what I am? Someone worth coming home to?" "You're someone worth becoming a better man for." Christopher moved closer, drawn by gravity he couldn't resist. "Someone worth risking everything to keep." "Everything. The company, the money, my family's approval." Christopher's hands found her face, cradling it like something precious. "All of it. For you." Danielle's breath caught. "Christopher, I love you." The words were easier this time, more certain. Not the partnership, not the challenge, not the way you make me feel redeemed. "You. How do you know?" The lawsuit hit Christopher's desk at exactly 9:17 a.m., and by 9:18, he knew his father had been a thief. The legal papers felt heavy in Christopher's hands, not because of the weight, but because of what they meant. Danielle's family attorney had done his homework. Every stolen design, every borrowed phrase, every piece of intellectual property that built Hale Industries, documented with surgical precision. Christopher's secretary knocked twice before entering. "Sir, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. The Washington Post is on line 3, and cancel everything." His voice came out flat, defeated. "Tell them I'm unavailable." But he wasn't unavailable. He was drowning. The evidence spread across his mahogany desk told a story his family had hidden for decades. His grandfather hadn't been an innovative businessman. He'd been a master manipulator who'd stolen ideas from black inventors across the South and claimed them as his own. Danielle's family motto wasn't just stolen words. It was the key to understanding how 3 generations of Hales had built their fortune on other people's genius. His phone buzzed. "Danielle." He let it ring. The conference room felt smaller than usual when he finally faced his board. 12 faces stared back at him, some shocked, others calculating their exit strategies. "Gentlemen," Christopher began, his throat dry. "Ladies, we have a problem." The presentation took 23 minutes. 23 minutes to watch his empire crumble into legal briefs and moral bankruptcy. When he finished, the silence stretched until board member Patricia Williams cleared her throat. "Christopher, we need to discuss damage control. The company's reputation. The company's reputation is built on theft." The words came out harder than he intended. "My family stole from hers. From dozens of families. We owe them everything." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some demanding his resignation, others proposing settlement strategies. Christopher watched it all like he was floating above himself, detached from the chaos. His phone buzzed again. "Danielle." This time he answered. "Chris." Her voice cut through the boardroom noise. "Where are you? People are saying things online, and I need to see you. I'm at the community center. We're having an emergency meeting about the development project." Christopher stood up, ignoring the continuing arguments around him. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." The drive to Danielle's neighborhood felt like traveling to another planet. Media trucks lined the streets now, reporters waiting for someone to blame or someone to defend. Christopher parked 3 blocks away and walked, pulling his baseball cap low. The community center buzzed with angry voices. Through the window, he could see Danielle at the front of the room, her hands moving as she spoke. Even in crisis, she commanded respect. He waited outside until the meeting ended, watching neighbors file out, some glaring in his direction, others looking curious. When Danielle finally emerged, her eyes found his immediately. "So it's true?" she asked, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. Every word. She nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting this answer. "Walk with me." They moved through a neighborhood in silence, past houses where families were probably discussing the scandal over dinner, past the playground where kids would grow up knowing that sometimes the powerful steal from the powerless and get away with it for generations. "You know what hurts most?" Danielle finally spoke. "It's not that your family stole from mine. It's that you looked me in the eye every night and never said anything." Christopher stopped walking. "I didn't know. Not until this morning. But you suspected." He couldn't deny it. The pieces had been there. His grandfather's sudden wealth in the 1940s, the family's reluctance to discuss business origins, the way his father changed subjects whenever anyone asked about their motto's meaning. "Yes," he admitted. "I suspected." Danielle's laugh held no humor. "At least you're honest now." They'd reached her apartment building. Under the streetlight, her face looked tired, not just from today, but from weeks of carrying his burdens alongside her own. "What happens now?" Christopher asked. Danielle studied his face for a long moment. "That depends. Are you going to fight this? Deny everything? Let your lawyers bury my family in paperwork for the next decade?" "No." "Then what?" Christopher reached into his jacket, pulling out the original legal documents. "I'm going to make this right. All of it. The money, the credit, the recognition your family deserves. I don't care if it bankrupts me." Danielle took the papers, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent electricity through both of them. The same attraction that had been building for weeks, now complicated by betrayal and justice. "And us?" she whispered. Christopher's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. "That's up to you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know my family caused yours decades of pain. But I love you, Danielle, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that some Hales can be better than what came before." The kiss that followed tasted like tears and hope and the weight of history finally being acknowledged. Have you ever fallen in love with someone your family would never approve of? Someone who challenged everything you thought you knew about yourself? Drop a comment about the hardest choice love ever forced you to make. The press conference would either save Christopher's soul or destroy his fortune, and Danielle held both outcomes in her hands. The cameras flashed like lightning as Christopher approached the podium. Behind him, in large photos displayed the stolen designs, the original manuscripts, the evidence of his family's crimes. Beside him stood Danielle, beautiful and composed in a way that made every reporter lean forward. 3 weeks ago, Christopher began, his voice carrying across the packed conference room. "I learned that my family's empire was built on theft. Today, I'm here to return what was stolen and to begin making amends for decades of injustice." The questions came fast and sharp. "Mr. Hale, are you admitting criminal wrongdoing? How much money are we talking about? Miss Carter, what do you want from him?" Danielle stepped forward. The room quieted. "What I want," she said clearly, "is for young people in my community to know that intelligence and creativity are valued, no matter where they come from. What I want is for Mr. Hale to prove that wealth doesn't have to corrupt, that it can actually heal." Christopher watched her speak and felt something shift inside his chest. She could have destroyed him completely. Instead, she was offering redemption. After the conference, they escaped to her apartment, both emotionally drained. The media circus continued outside, but inside felt like sanctuary. "You realize what you just did?" Danielle asked, kicking off her heels and sinking into the couch. "You gave up everything." Christopher loosened his tie, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. I gave up money. I kept what matters. Which is? He sat beside her, close enough to smell her perfume, to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. You. This. The chance to build something honest. Danielle's fingers found his shirt buttons, working them open slowly. The board will force you out. You know that, right? Probably. His hands slipped into her hair, loosening the professional bond she'd worn for the cameras. Are you okay with dating an unemployed ex-CEO? Depends. Her lips brushed his neck, sending heat through his entire body. What are your other skills? Christopher's answer got lost in the kiss that followed, deep and hungry and desperate. They made love that evening with an intensity born from crisis, from choosing each other despite the cost. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Danielle traced patterns on Christopher's chest. My grandfather would have liked you, she said quietly, even knowing what my family did to his. Especially knowing that. She looked up at him. He always said the measure of a man isn't in his family's mistakes. It's in whether he has the courage to fix them. Christopher's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Text after text. Missed calls. The world demanding answers, apologies, explanations. Ignore it, Danielle whispered, her mouth finding his again. And for the first time in his adult life, Christopher Hale chose love over business, connection over profit, truth over the easy lie. The next morning brought new challenges. Christopher's bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. His apartment building manager left 3 messages about media disruption. His mother called from Dallas, her voice cold and clipped. You've destroyed everything your grandfather built. Good, Christopher replied. It needed destroying. The line went dead. Danielle made coffee in her tiny kitchen while Christopher sat at her table, surrounded by legal documents and financial statements. The contrast wasn't lost on either of them. Yesterday, he'd commanded boardrooms worth millions. Today, he was calculating if he could afford lunch. Regrets? Danielle asked, setting a steaming mug beside him. Christopher looked at her. Hair messy from sleep, wearing his shirt from yesterday, more beautiful than any woman who'd ever graced his arm at charity galas. None. That afternoon, they walked through her neighborhood hand in hand. Some residents stared, others nodded approval. Mrs. Washington from the corner market squeezed Danielle's arm. Your grandmother would be proud, baby girl. You got justice for the family. But as they passed the construction site where Christopher's original development was supposed to happen, they found something that made both of them stop cold. New signs. Different company name. Same luxury condos planned. Same displacement threatened. They're moving forward anyway, Danielle breathed. Different company, same damage. Christopher studied the permits posted on the fence. These were filed yesterday. They knew this was coming. The betrayal hit differently this time. Not family secrets buried in history, but fresh wounds inflicted by people he trusted. Who? Danielle asked. Christopher's jaw tightened as he recognized the signature on the permits. My business partner, Marcus Webb. He's been planning this for months. The pieces fell together like a collapsed house of cards. Marcus had known about the investigation before Christopher did, had been positioning himself to take over the moment scandal hit, had probably encouraged Christopher's relationship with Danielle, knowing it would eventually lead to this exposure. He used us, Christopher said, his voice barely controlled. Both of us. Danielle's hand found his, squeezing tight. Then we stop him. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was playing you from the beginning? How do you fight back when the enemy knows all your moves? Share your experiences below. Marcus Webb thought he'd won by stealing Christopher's empire, until he realized he'd made one fatal mistake. The construction trucks arrived at dawn, ready to demolish Mrs. Patterson's house to make room for luxury condos. But instead of an empty street, they found 200 residents forming a human wall, with Christopher and Danielle at the center. Marcus Webb stepped out of his black Mercedes, his smile sharp and confident. Christopher, you're trespassing on private property. Funny thing about private property, Christopher replied, not moving from his position in front of the bulldozer. Turns out you need legitimate permits to claim it. Marcus's smile flickered. I have all the necessary paperwork. Danielle stepped forward, holding a thick folder. Paperwork that was filed using stolen intellectual property as collateral. Property that legally belongs to my family. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized what she was holding. Original patents, filed by her great-grandfather in 1943. Designs that had been lost in a fire that destroyed the patent office records. Except Danielle's family had kept copies in their home. Those patents expired decades ago, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, came a new voice from the crowd. Attorney James Mitchell approached, briefcase in hand. Under the Stolen Intellectual Property Recovery Act, patents stolen through fraudulent means can be restored to their rightful owners with full back compensation. Christopher had never heard of such an act, but from Marcus's expression, it was real and devastating. You see, Marcus, Christopher continued, when you steal from thieves, you're still stealing. Every design my grandfather took, every idea my father claimed, it all belongs to families like Danielle's. And now they're taking it back. The standoff stretched tension tight. Construction workers looked between their boss and the crowd, unsure whose orders to follow. Police cars arrived, but didn't intervene. Too many cameras, too much public attention. Marcus made his fatal error then, stepping close enough to Christopher that only a few people could hear. You think this little love story changes anything? She's using you, Christopher. Poor girl sees dollar signs and suddenly develops feelings for the rich white boy. How convenient. The words hit Christopher like physical blows, not because he believed them, but because Marcus had chosen the cruelest possible attack. Danielle heard every word. Her response was swift and surgical. Marcus Webb, everyone here knows you tried to buy my restaurant 3 times. Everyone here knows you offered me $50,000 to convince Christopher to sell his development rights to you. Everyone here knows you've been planning this takeover since before Christopher and I even met. She stepped closer, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. But what they don't know yet is that you've been embezzling money from Christopher's accounts for 2 years. Taking small amounts, thinking he'd never notice. Should I tell them about the offshore accounts? The fake invoices? The money you stole to fund this project? Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again. You can't prove any of that. Christopher reached into his jacket, pulling out a USB drive. Actually, she can. Amazing what a forensic accountant finds when someone knows exactly where to look. The betrayal was complete. Marcus had stolen from Christopher, manipulated the scandal to his advantage, and planned to profit from the destruction of Danielle's community. But he'd underestimated both of them. Officers, Attorney Mitchell called to the waiting police. I believe you'll want to review these financial documents. As handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, he looked at Christopher with pure hatred. This won't end here. You'll never rebuild what you've lost. Christopher watched his former partner being led away and felt nothing but relief. I was never trying to rebuild what I lost. I was trying to build something better. The crowd began to disperse as construction trucks pulled away. The immediate threat was over, but Christopher knew the real work was just beginning. Danielle's hand slipped into his as they watched the last news van drive away. So what now, she asked. Christopher looked at the empty lot where luxury condos would have displaced families, then at the community center where children were already playing in the yard, safe for another day. Now we build something that actually matters. That evening, they sat on Danielle's fire escape, sharing takeout and watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Below them, the neighborhood hummed with normal life. Kids riding bikes, couples walking dogs, teenagers hanging out on stoops. Chris, Danielle said softly. Earlier, when Marcus said those things about me using you, I never believed him for a second, but it made you think. Christopher set down his food and turned to face her fully. It made me think about how grateful I am that you saw something worth saving in me. How lucky I am that you decided I was worth a risk. Danielle's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all day. I love you. Not your money, not your name, not what you can do for my community. Just you. Even unemployed, disgraced, probably going to be investigated by the IRS me. Especially that version. Their kiss was interrupted by cheering from the street below. Someone had hung a banner between two buildings. Community wins. Love wins. Justice wins. Think we'll make it? Christopher asked, holding Danielle closer. Depends. You ready to actually work for a living? Christopher laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in weeks. I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as it's with you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping your comfortable life or fighting for what's right? Tell me about a time when love made you braver than you thought possible. Share your story in the comments below. 6 months later, Christopher Hale was broke, unemployed, and happier than he'd ever been in his life. The coffee shop was small, cramped, and perpetually busy. Christopher had bought it with the last of his legitimate savings after the legal settlements were finalized. He named it Second Chances Cafe, partly as a joke, partly as a promise. Danielle pushed through the door at 6 a.m. sharp, same as every morning for the past month. She'd kept her teaching job, but helped him learn the business, how to manage inventory, handle difficult customers, make coffee that didn't taste like motor oil. Morning, boss, she said, tying an apron around her waist. Good morning, beautiful. The routine felt natural now. Christopher behind the counter taking orders, Danielle handling the register and charming customers into buying extra pastries. They'd found their rhythm. At 7:30, the morning rush hit. Construction workers, teachers, nurses, the backbone of Atlanta filing through for caffeine and Christopher's slowly improving breakfast sandwiches. Mrs. Washington ordered her usual black coffee, no sugar, with a smile that had become the best part of Christopher's morning. You two getting married yet? She asked. Same question every day. Working on it, Christopher replied. Same answer every day. But today, Danielle looked up from the register with surprise. Working on it. Christopher reached under the counter, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out a small velvet box. The diamond wasn't huge. He couldn't afford huge anymore, but it was real, honest, paid for with money he'd earned himself. Danielle Carter, he said, his voice carrying over the morning chatter. Will you marry a broke ex-CEO who makes terrible coffee but loves you more than life itself? The cafe went completely quiet. Every customer, every regular, every person who'd watched this unlikely love story unfold held their breath. Danielle's eyes filled with tears as she came around the counter. Only if he promises to keep making terrible coffee for the rest of our lives. Deal. The kiss that sealed their engagement was witnessed by 50 strangers who cheered like they'd been waiting months for this moment. Which, in a way, they had. Later, as they cleaned up after closing, Christopher reflected on the journey. He lost millions but gained everything that mattered. Love, respect, purpose, community. No regrets? Danielle asked, catching him staring at the engagement ring on her finger. Christopher pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair mixed with coffee beans and possibility. Best trade I ever made. What's the most valuable thing you ever lost that led to finding something better? Share your second chance stories below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of love, loss, and redemption.